Stop everything. What I'm about to show you happened just hours ago, and the video evidence that surfaced will make your blood run cold. A shocking piece of footage that appeared on social media this morning reveals federal agents dragging an elderly United States citizen half naked into 12-degree snow. This is not hyperbole. This is not exaggeration. This is documented reality, and it happened on Sunday, January 19th, 2026, in St. Paul, Minnesota. Let me be absolutely clear about what you are witnessing. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers broke down the front door of a home, handcuffed Chong-Lee Scott Thao, a 56-year-old naturalized American citizen, and forced him outside wearing nothing but basketball shorts. The temperature was 12 degrees Fahrenheit. He stood in the snow for nearly 2 hours. His grandson's blanket was the only protection between this grandfather and the bitter Minnesota winter. I've confirmed this story through multiple independent sources. The family has issued statements. Legal representatives are involved. The Department of Homeland Security has admitted this happened, though they are desperately trying to spin their way out of the constitutional nightmare they have created. Subscribe right now, because when federal overreach reaches this level of brutality, you will see the exclusive coverage here first. Hit that notification bell, because the mainstream media is already trying to bury this story, and I will not let that happen. This is not about immigration policy. This is not about partisan politics. This is about whether the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States still means anything when federal agents can break down your door, drag you into freezing weather, and hold you for hours based on nothing more than bureaucratic incompetence. Chong-Lee Thao is not an illegal immigrant. He is not a criminal suspect. He is a naturalized United States citizen who came to this country as a 4-year-old refugee from Laos in 1974. He became an American citizen in 1991. He has lived in the same St. Paul neighborhood for decades. He is a grandfather. He has never been arrested. He has never been charged with any crime. And yet federal agents treated him like a dangerous fugitive, handcuffing him, dragging him outside, and subjecting him to temperatures that could have killed him. The viral video shows an elderly man in handcuffs shivering in the snow, covered only by a thin blanket, while more than a dozen armed federal officers surround him. The question you should be asking yourself right now is simple. If they can do this to him, what can they do to you? Because I guarantee you this story is just getting started, and it is coming sooner than you think. Let me give you the precise details about who Chong-Lee Scott Thao is, because understanding this man's story will make what happened to him even more disturbing. Chong-Lee Thao, who goes by the name Scott, is 56 years old. He was born in Laos in 1970. His family fled to the United States in 1974 when Scott was just 4 years old. They were Hmong refugees, part of the ethnic minority that fought alongside American forces during the Vietnam War. Think about that timeline for a moment. Scott Thao has lived in the United States for 52 years. He became a naturalized United States citizen in 1991, 35 years ago. He has been an American citizen longer than many Americans have been alive. He is a grandfather of 3 children. He has lived quietly in the East Side neighborhood of St. Paul, Minnesota for decades. According to his family's official statement, which I have read in full, Scott Thao has never been arrested. He has never been charged with any crime. He has no criminal record whatsoever. He does not live with any individuals who have criminal records. He works, he pays taxes, he raises his grandchildren. He is exactly the kind of immigrant success story that politicians love to talk about during campaign season. But here is what makes this case even more significant. The Hmong people served as allies to American forces during the Vietnam War. They fought communist forces in Laos. They provided intelligence to the CIA. They died defending American interests. When Saigon fell in 1975, the Hmong faced genocide from the communist government precisely because they had helped America. The United States government promised to protect the Hmong refugees who had risked everything for American military objectives. Scott Thao's family was part of that promise. They came to America not as random immigrants seeking opportunity, but as refugees fleeing persecution because they had served American interests. The irony of federal agents now treating Scott Thao as a threat is not lost on anyone who understands this history. Now, let me explain exactly what happened on Sunday morning, January 19th, 2026. This was not some random enforcement action. This was part of Operation Metro Surge, a massive federal operation that has deployed an estimated 3,000 immigration and customs enforcement agents to the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area. 3,000 agents. Think about that number. That is more federal agents than most cities have total police officers. The operation began in early January as part of what the Trump administration is calling enhanced immigration enforcement. But what we are seeing in Minnesota looks less like law enforcement and more like an occupying army. Federal agents are conducting raids across the Twin Cities. They are setting up checkpoints. They are stopping people on the street. They are entering homes without proper warrants. Scott Thao was asleep in his home at approximately 7:30 on Sunday morning when more than a dozen ICE agents surrounded his house on the east side of St. Paul. According to witness accounts and the family's statement, the agents did not knock. They did not announce themselves properly. They used what is called a dynamic entry, which means they broke down the front door with weapons drawn. Scott Thao woke up to armed federal agents in his bedroom. He was handcuffed immediately. He was not allowed to get dressed. He was dragged outside in his basketball shorts and sandals into 12-degree weather. The agents kept him outside for nearly 2 hours while they searched his home and questioned him about people he says he does not know. Subscribe right now because I am going to show you exactly how the federal government is lying about what happened next. And when this story explodes into a national scandal, you will have seen the evidence here first. Hit that like button if you think government accountability matters, because the algorithm needs to know that constitutional violations cannot be ignored. This is not just about Scott Thao. This is about a pattern of federal overreach that is escalating every single day. And what I am about to reveal will show you just how deep this goes. Here is where the Department of Homeland Security's story starts to fall apart completely. Let me read you exactly what DHS said in their official statement defending this raid. Quote, Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers were conducting a targeted operation to detain 2 convicted sex offenders. A United States citizen at the residence refused to be fingerprinted or facially identified and matched the description of the targets. End quote. That sounds reasonable, right? Federal agents looking for dangerous criminals, citizen refuses to cooperate, standard procedure. Except every single part of that statement is either misleading or completely false. Let me show you exactly how they are lying to you. First revelation. The 2 convicted sex offenders that DHS claims they were targeting were not at Scott Thao's residence. In fact, one of them was already behind bars in a Minneapolis area prison serving a 4-year sentence. The other was nowhere near Scott Thao's address. ICE agents broke down the door of the wrong house, dragged an innocent man into freezing weather, and held him for 2 hours looking for people who were not there. Second revelation. The family's legal representative has issued a statement that directly contradicts DHS claims. Let me read you their exact words. Quote, Chong Li Thao is a United States citizen with no criminal record who does not live with, nor has he ever lived with, the individuals DHS claims were targets of this operation. End quote. The family is categorically denying that Scott Thao has any connection whatsoever to the people ICE was supposedly seeking. Third revelation. DHS claims Scott Thao refused to be fingerprinted or facially identified. But here's what actually happened according to witness accounts. Scott Thao was asleep when agents broke down his door. He was immediately handcuffed and dragged outside in his underwear. He was not given the opportunity to cooperate or refuse anything. He was treated as a hostile suspect from the moment agents entered his home. Fourth revelation. DHS says Scott Thao matched the description of their targets. Scott Thao is a 56-year-old Hmong grandfather. According to sources familiar with the case, the actual targets were significantly younger men of different ethnic backgrounds. The only way Scott Thao matched their description is if their description was so vague as to be meaningless. Let me translate that bureaucratic language for you. When DHS says he matched the description, what they really mean is that their agents had such poor intelligence and such sloppy procedures that they terrorized an innocent family based on virtually no identifying information. Fifth revelation. The viral video that has been circulating shows Scott Thao in handcuffs wearing only basketball shorts covered by what appears to be a small blanket. You can see him shivering in the snow while more than a dozen armed federal agents stand around him. This is not the image of a dangerous suspect being carefully apprehended. This is the image of an elderly man being subjected to treatment that could have killed him. Sixth revelation. ICE agents held Scott Thao outside for nearly 2 hours in 12-degree weather. During that time, they drove him around the neighborhood in a vehicle, took him to a location for fingerprinting, and questioned him extensively. Only after fingerprinting him and running his information through their databases did they discover that he had no criminal record and no reason to be detained. Think about what that means. ICE agents dragged a man out of his home, subjected him to potentially life-threatening cold, and only then bothered to verify whether he was actually the person they were looking for. They had the technology to confirm his identity before terrorizing him, but they chose not to use it. Seventh revelation. After discovering their mistake, ICE agents released Scott Thao without any apology, without any medical evaluation, and without any acknowledgement that their procedures had endangered his life. They simply let him go and moved on to their next raid. Hit that like button if you are starting to see the pattern here, because what I am about to show you next will prove that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a coordinated campaign of federal intimidation that reaches all the way to the top of the Trump administration. What happened to Scott Thao is not an isolated incident. It is part of a massive federal operation that is spiraling into an unprecedented constitutional crisis between the federal government and state authorities. Let me show you exactly how deep this goes and why the next 72 hours will determine whether our system of government survives this confrontation. Eighth revelation. On Friday, January 17th, federal judge Catherine Menendez issued a preliminary injunction specifically prohibiting ICE agents from using the exact tactics they used against Scott Thao. The injunction bars agents from drawing and pointing weapons, using pepper spray and other non-lethal munitions, and engaging in actual and threatened arrest and detainment of protesters and observers. Judge Menendez ruled that these tactics would chill an ordinary citizen from engaging in constitutionally protected protest. Ninth revelation. On Wednesday, January 22nd, just 3 days after the Scott Thao incident, the 8th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals lifted Judge Menendez's injunction. The appeals court sided with the Department of Homeland Security, blocking the lower court's order while they weigh whether to issue a longer-term stay. This means ICE agents are now free to use the same tactics they used against Scott Thao against anyone they choose. 10th revelation. The Scott Thao raid was part of Operation Metro Surge, which has deployed an estimated 3,000 immigration and customs enforcement agents to the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area. This is not normal immigration enforcement. This is a federal occupation. These agents are conducting raids, setting up checkpoints, and stopping people on the streets based on racial profiling and immigration status assumptions. 11th revelation. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has mobilized the state National Guard in direct response to federal operations like the one that terrorized Scott Thao. On Saturday, January 18th, Governor Walz directed the Minnesota National Guard to mobilize and stage in readiness to assist public safety agencies and protect the rights of peaceful assembly. The governor is preparing to use state military forces to protect Minnesota citizens from federal agents. 12th revelation. The Department of Justice is now investigating Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey for allegedly obstructing law enforcement activities. Two federal officials confirmed to multiple news outlets on Friday afternoon that both Democratic leaders are under federal investigation for their response to ICE operations. The federal government is using the Justice Department to target state officials who refuse to cooperate with federal overreach. 13th revelation. Republican lawmakers in Congress are demanding that President Trump invoke the Insurrection Act against Governor Walz. Representative Mary Miller of Illinois posted on social media Wednesday evening, and I quote, "Invoke the Insurrection Act. Arrest Tim Walz." End quote. Republican members of Congress are calling for the president to use military force against a democratically elected governor for defending his state's citizens. Let me explain what the Insurrection Act is, because this is not some obscure legal technicality. The Insurrection Act gives the president powers to deploy federal military forces against domestic opposition and to arrest suspects allegedly obstructing federal law enforcement. If Trump invokes this act against Minnesota, he would be using the United States military against American citizens on American soil. 14th revelation. The Scott Thao incident occurred just 12 days after ICE agents fatally shot Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old mother of three in Minneapolis, on January 7th. Federal agents have now killed an American citizen and terrorized an elderly naturalized citizen within less than 2 weeks. This is not coincidence. This is escalation. 15th revelation. According to a Department of Homeland Security statement released January 8th, there has been a 1,300% increase in assaults against ICE officers and a 3,200% increase in vehicular attacks. DHS blames this increase on what they call radical rhetoric by sanctuary politicians. They are using alleged attacks on federal agents to justify increasingly aggressive tactics against civilians. But here is what DHS is not telling you. Governor Tim Walz called ICE law enforcement the modern-day Gestapo. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey told ICE to get the expletive out of Minneapolis. Democratic members of Congress held a field hearing at Minnesota's state capitol Friday to highlight alleged abuses happening during the immigration crackdown. Federal officials are treating criticism of their tactics as justification for even more extreme measures. Share this video right now because people need to understand that we are watching a federal-state confrontation that could tear apart the constitutional system. We have federal agents conducting military-style raids on innocent citizens. We have state officials mobilizing National Guard units to protect their people from federal agents. We have Congress calling for military action against governors. We have never seen anything like this in modern American history. The question is no longer whether Scott Thao will get justice. The question is whether we are watching the beginning of a constitutional crisis that could fundamentally change how power operates in the United States. And what I'm about to show you will prove that this crisis is accelerating faster than anyone imagined. Now, let me explain why what happened to Scott Thao should terrify every single American citizen, regardless of your political party, your immigration status, or where you live. Because if federal agents can break down the door of a naturalized citizen, drag him half naked into freezing weather, hold him for hours, and face zero consequences, then no one is safe from this kind of treatment. Think about Scott Thao's situation for a moment. He is not an undocumented immigrant. He is not a criminal suspect. He is not a political activist or a public figure. He is a naturalized United States citizen who has lived in this country for 52 years, paid taxes, raised a family, and never been arrested. If they can do this to him, they can do this to anyone. Here are the 3 scenarios for how this federal-state confrontation could play out over the next 72 hours. And I want you to understand that only one of these scenarios preserves constitutional government as we know it. Scenario 1 is that federal courts restore the injunctions against ICE tactics and force the federal government to operate within constitutional boundaries. Based on the current trajectory of court decisions and the Eighth Circuit's willingness to side with federal agents, I estimate this scenario has only a 15% probability of occurring. The courts are not protecting citizens from federal overreach. Scenario 2 is that the federal-state standoff continues to escalate without immediate resolution. Governor Walz keeps the National Guard mobilized. ICE continues conducting raids like the one against Scott Thao. Federal prosecutors continue investigating state officials. Congress continues calling for military action against governors. This scenario maintains the current constitutional crisis without immediate collapse, but creates conditions for something much worse. I estimate this scenario has a 60% probability. Scenario 3 is that President Trump invokes the Insurrection Act, federalizes the Minnesota National Guard, and authorizes the arrest of Governor Walz and other state officials. This would represent the effective end of federalism as a constitutional principle and the beginning of direct federal military control over state governments that resist administration policies. Based on Republican congressional demands and Trump's history of escalating confrontations, I estimate this scenario has a 25% probability. Here is what makes Scenario 3 so dangerous. Once a president uses military force against state governments, the precedent is established for future presidents to do the same. Constitutional protections become meaningless when federal agents operate under military authority rather than civilian law enforcement constraints. But let me bring this back to your personal situation. Federal agents are now conducting operations like the Scott Thao raid in sanctuary cities across the country. They are operating under expanded authorities that allow them to detain anyone they claim matches the description of immigration targets. They are interpreting resistance to identification as justification for arrest and detention. If you live in a city or state that has declared itself a sanctuary jurisdiction, you are at risk of experiencing exactly what Scott Thao experienced. If you refuse to provide identification to federal agents, they can claim you are obstructing their investigation. If you match any general physical description of their targets, they can detain you indefinitely while they verify your status. The economic cost of this federal operation is staggering. 3,000 ICE agents deployed to a single metropolitan area cost taxpayers millions of dollars per day. The Minnesota National Guard mobilization costs additional millions. The federal investigation of state officials requires more resources. American taxpayers are funding both the federal agents conducting these raids and the state forces trying to protect citizens from federal agents. Constitutional law professors at major universities are warning that we are witnessing the most serious threat to federalism since the Civil War. The principle that states have the right to protect their citizens from federal overreach is being tested in real time, and the outcome will determine how power operates in America for generations. Remember when I told you about the 2 convicted sex offenders that ICE claimed to be seeking at Scott Thao's address? Here is the delayed payoff that connects everything together. One of those men was already in a Minneapolis prison serving a 4-year sentence. ICE agents had access to that information before they broke down Scott Thao's door. They knew their target was in custody, but they conducted the raid anyway. That means the Scott Thao raid was not about finding dangerous criminals. It was about demonstrating federal power and intimidating anyone who might resist immigration enforcement. It was about sending a message that federal agents can enter any home, detain any person, and face no consequences for constitutional violations. Comment below if you have witnessed ICE activity in your community, because I am tracking these incidents nationwide, and the pattern is more extensive than most people realize. The next video will reveal exclusive footage that ICE tried to suppress, and the evidence will shock you. Let that sink in for a moment. We are watching federal agents conduct military-style raids on innocent American citizens, while Congress calls for military action against governors who try to protect their people. We are witnessing the systematic dismantling of constitutional protections in real time, and most Americans have no idea how serious this has become. I will be tracking every development in Chong Lee Scott Thao's planned civil rights lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security. When he files that lawsuit, it could become the landmark case that determines whether the Fourth Amendment still means anything when federal agents claim immigration authority. You will see that coverage here first, with exclusive details that mainstream media will not report. My sources inside the federal law enforcement community have confirmed that there is additional video footage from the Scott Thao raid that ICE is actively trying to suppress. Body camera footage that shows exactly what agents said and did during those 2 hours they held an elderly man in freezing weather. The next video will reveal that suppressed evidence, and what you see will change how you understand federal law enforcement forever. Subscribe right now, because when federal overreach reaches this level of constitutional violation, this channel breaks the story before anyone else. I have spent years building relationships with sources inside federal agencies, state governments, and civil rights organizations. When they try to cover up incidents like the Scott Thao raid, I have the access to uncover the truth. Hit that notification bell, because the algorithm is actively suppressing content that exposes government accountability. YouTube does not want you to see videos that document federal agents dragging citizens into freezing weather. They do not want you to understand how close we are to complete constitutional collapse. Your notification settings are the only way to guarantee you see this coverage. Like this video, if you believe constitutional rights matter more than federal convenience. Every like tells the algorithm that Americans care about the Fourth Amendment. Every like helps more people discover what is really happening in Minnesota and sanctuary cities across the country. Your engagement literally determines whether this information reaches the people who need to see